What's up everyone, welcome back to the channel guys. So another SWI. Yesterday's video wasn't really a SWI, that was more like a throwback video, but this time I actually want to take a look at another phone that I've been talking about heavily. And dude, this one was like one of the most popular phones ever, and it's still brought up quite a bit to this day. People say this was like Samsung's last greatest phone. It was the last phone that brought everything to the table and all this stuff, and the time Samsung didn't really hold out. And that specific phone is the Samsung Galaxy S5. Now, when this phone came out back in 2014, almost over 4 or 5 years ago actually, this was the phone that pretty much a lot of people loved. There was a lot of hate for this phone too, but at the time in 2014, we had like the iPhone 6 at the time, and there weren't really a lot of phones that were like looking really that great, so I kind of have to give this one the benefit of the doubt. But coming from a Galaxy S4, I do think the Galaxy S5 didn't look as good and appealing as the S4, but I think the S5 was way more functional, and even though they did a lot of weird things with it, I think it's still an awesome phone, and I think it's definitely super interesting. And even just starting off with the front, you had a 5.1 inch 1080p Super AMOLED display. Now the screen resolution was 1080p like I stated, 432 pixels per inch, and I do think that the S5's panel isn't bad, but looking at it now, there's some noticeable air gap between the screen itself and like the actual thing you're touching, which is pretty funny because like I've seen like really budget phones of this year that have like the $100, $150 price tag that don't even feel like this. So thinking about a phone that came out in 2014 that was like the top tier, that was the flagship, and having a thing like this is pretty funny. You have the home button on the front, which is actually a fingerprint sensor as well, but the weird thing is you rub your fingerprint sensor on it in order for it to work. Eventually they fixed that with the next versions, but this one was always really weird like that. You have the back button and then the multitasking panel. Front camera obviously on the back. You had a single camera sensor, but the best thing about the back was not only the heart rate sensor, but also the removable back. You were able to remove this back and also remove the battery and change it for another battery. But on top of that, you had expandable storage on this phone as well. So you can put a micro SD card slot, which is super awesome. So thinking about now, we don't have removable batteries. A lot of phones don't even have micro SD card slots, which is pretty insane. But this phone had it all back in 2014. So that's why some people claim that this is probably Samsung's last greatest phone, or the last phone like they didn't really hold out on features, is because they brought everything to the table and they left it there. It wasn't the best looking thing, but people overlooked that because, it was super functional in a lot of ways. This thing also was IP67 dust and water resistant, but here's the thing. The back of this phone had to be on in order for it to be like fully water resistant, which makes sense now. But with a removable back, you had to have that plastic covering around the back of the phone. So in order for that to happen, you had to, fully make sure the back of this phone was sealed up. If it wasn't, then you would, mess up your phone overall. Also, the flap on the bottom was one of the most annoying things ever, but in order to keep that IP certification, they had to keep that on. So not the end of the world. It was kind of annoying, but I ripped mine out. So if you want to do that, you can do that on yours. And that's pretty much it on the outside. Again, nothing has really changed on the outside except the phones that we have now, with even with the Galaxy S10. Look at the Galaxy S5 and look at the Galaxy S10. Look how far we've came. Just in like a 5-year span, that is in some insane progress that we've seen. Even with the Galaxy S8, that was like a 3-year progress, and look how it's crazy the evolution that we have, honestly. Now that pretty much covers it up in terms of the outside. And now hitting on the software, this thing started off with Android 4.4.2 KitKat. You were able to upgrade it to Android 6.0.1, which is what my phone is on now. And that one did end on TouchWiz, which kind of sucks. With Android Nougat and Android Oreo, whatever, they eventually changed the Samsung experience, and then with One UI that they have now. Now, in my opinion, TouchWiz honestly was probably one of the worst Samsung UIs ever and one of the worst Android UIs ever. I still think LG's is pretty bad even to this day. OnePlus with Auction OS is the best. But with this phone specifically, I can tell you there's so much development community behind it that you can easily root this thing and ROM this thing and be set. I think I even saw some Android Pie ROMs out for this thing. I could be mistaken. I should have looked again. But as far as I know, there's custom ROMs out there that are still being developed, and it's not extremely hard to root this phone. So back in like 2015, 2016, there might have been development community, but there was still native support. Now in the later part of 2019, it only makes sense if you currently own this phone or you want to buy this phone. It only makes sense for you to do that, okay? Mostly all the features tend to work on most custom ROMs, especially when this phone has been out for this long. If you put like an Android Oreo ROM on this phone, like you'll be set, you'll be perfectly fine. This thing is not getting any more security updates. This thing is not getting any support natively from Samsung, so your best bet is custom ROMing this thing, which I would highly recommend. So if you want to root this thing, if you want to ROM this thing, be my guest. I would be super happy if you did it. Just be careful, make sure you back up all your information and everything. Now, the best thing about this phone is the micro SD card slot, so you can always go going to expand this thing up to even 256 gigabytes, which is super awesome. So even if you throw a custom ROM there, you'll be set. Just put it on micro SD card, so you'll be fine. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of software. It's pretty much done, but you still have custom ROM support, which is awesome. Now hitting on the performance, okay, this thing had the Qualcomm Snapdragon 801 chipset, a quad-core CPU, an Adreno 330 GPU, and 2 gigabytes of RAM. Now there were two models of the Samsung Galaxy S5, a 16 gigabyte and 32 gigabyte model. Both those models had 2 gigs of RAM, but again, micro SD card slot, you could expand that storage. Now what I can tell you is in terms of the overall performance, it's not bad per se, it's just really weird. Like when you factor in the age like 2014, okay, iPhone 6 came out this time too. Like iPhone 6 was pretty slow, so I'm expecting the Galaxy S5 to be a little bit, around that same age and around that same performance, and it kind of is, but I think it's faster than the iPhone 6 for sure. It's not a completely slow phone either, so without me beating around the bush for 10 minutes, basically, when you're loading apps or when you're doing things, it's not slow per se, but it's just kind of stuttery, and it is kind of slow to load up the apps, but once the app is loaded, it's not completely bad. I did notice that this phone does heat up so much, and I thought it was only a Galaxy S4 thing. I've owned many Galaxy S5s, this one being probably like my 5th or 6th one, and I didn't notice it like right out the gate being super heating up or anything like that. But I do notice at this point that it does heat up quite a bit. So not a bad thing, not a horrible thing, not a deal breaker, but that is one thing that when you're kind of loading up all these apps, especially when you go into more like the intensive route, that's when things do kind of get starting to heat up a little bit on the phone, literally. Intermediate apps, kind of like Temple Run and things like that, those run fine too once they get loaded up. A little bit stuttery here and there, a little glitchy, but overall they do run. Once you kind of get into that bigger territory like Real Racing 3 and things like that, the performance is usable, but it's pretty glitchy. The phone does heat up quite a bit, and that kind of really takes a knock at the performance. When you're getting a phone like the 2014 Samsung Galaxy S5, you're expecting it to be slow, you're expecting it not to be the greatest, but you're not expecting it to heat up like this, which is really weird. That kind of takes a hit on not only the performance, but also the battery life as well, and which I'll hit on in a minute. But what I can tell you is performance for a 2014 phone, I'm pretty satisfied with it. Again, if this thing came out now, you would be completely dissatisfied. If you compared it even to like a Galaxy S8, you'd probably be like unsatisfied with it. But for a 2014 phone, what more do you want? You know what I mean? It's not the end of the world, but I would definitely, not get this phone just because of the performance. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of performance standpoint. Now hitting on the camera, this thing had a single 16 megapixel sensor on the back. You're able to shoot 4K videos on it, which is really nice. The iPhone 6 was not able to shoot 4K, but what's really nice is that the features built into this camera, like I stated before, are super awesome and super weird. I mean, like, you have a lot of features on this that the iPhone 11 Pro still doesn't have. Now, again, you have features on the 11 Pro, that camera is way better and everything, but the S5 really kind of was ahead of its time in a lot of ways. Now, the biggest downside of putting a custom ROM on your phone is that you kind of miss out on all those camera features and the camera quality tends to go down. But the Samsung Galaxy S5 has a pretty good camera even still to this day. So when you're taking photos nighttime, darker photos don't really look that good on this thing, but bright light photos look pretty decent. So without a doubt, the back camera is really good. The front camera is really bad though. You have a 2 megapixel front facing camera. You can shoot 1080p videos on it, which I didn't even know you can on 2 megapixels. But that camera is really bad. I don't recommend anybody using it, but that back camera though is not that bad though. So that pretty much covers it up in terms of a camera standpoint too. Now ending it off with the battery life. So this thing had a 2800 mAh battery, and if you kept it at that 2800 mAh, you'd probably have really bad battery life. And even on stock, the battery life wasn't even that good. But you do have a removable battery, which is super nice. So you can just pop off the back, buy a replaceable battery on Amazon, and just replace it, and have like a 3000 mAh battery, 5000 mAh battery if you want. I think I've even seen like 10,000 mAh batteries for these things, which is literally insane. And if you're in the market, dude, that's one thing that you have that ability to do on the S5 that you don't have that ability to do on so many other phones in the market, which, that kind of shows like why Samsung and why these phone manufacturers remove the removable battery or never even put them on them like the Galaxy, like the iPhone series. And the reason is because phone manufacturers want you to have a reason to update your phone. With Samsung, if they still kept that removable battery, they would want you to update eventually, and that's why they had to enclose that, because that gives you a reason to update. That was really smart for Apple to never do that. LG, all these people, they removed that too. So the Samsung, that's why so many people love the Galaxy S5, because you have that ability. This phone, in theory, could technically last as long as it doesn't break. As long as you don't mess up the screen or the hardware itself, you can replace that battery and just keep replacing it over and over again, as long as you don't fry the internals or whatever. And that's why a lot of people love the S5. And I think overall, dude, in the later part of 2019, I think it still kind of holds up, only because of that removable battery and removable storage. The screen itself is not that bad. The back camera is not bad. there's still a little bit of a development community behind it, and you can probably pick one of these things up for like $50. So as a main phone, I don't think it's a horrible decision if you're willing to custom ROM it. I wouldn't really use it if you're stuck on Android Marshmallow. That's not a really that safe of a version of Android, not that powerful. But if you're willing to actually go and custom ROM it, then this phone, dude, is not a bad phone still, and even 2019. If you need a phone to get you, a couple of days or a couple of weeks or whatever, even like a backup phone, it's not a bad phone at all. You're IP certified with it, and it still has a lot of value, I think. But if you're trying to get the most value per dollar, I mean, I would recommend getting even like the first Google Pixel or even like a Pixel 2. Those things are pretty cheap. You can always go for like a Galaxy S8. Those things are pretty powerful still, and those have One UI. Might be getting Android 10, probably not, but I think overall the Samsung Galaxy S5 still has a special place in my heart and a special place in so many people's hearts too. So if you want to pick up a Google Pixel 2 or a Galaxy S8, I'll find the cheapest ones on Amazon. I'll link them down in the description if you want to get them for the lowest prices or whatever. And you can help support the channel at the same time. But if you own a Samsung Galaxy S5 or you've owned one recently, let me know your experience down in the comment section below. I'd love to hear about it. But that's pretty much it. If you have any other questions or anything, leave those in the comment section as well. Hit that like button, that will mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it'll mean so much if you guys could hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my second channel. All those links are linked down below. I'd really appreciate if you guys could check it out. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.